So hello everyone, welcome. And I am Ann Thompson, the president of the WICT, Women in Cable Telecommunications DC Baltimore Chapter. And this is episode 10 of WICT Wednesdays. And I'm very happy to be here with a guest, Julie Dixon, to talk about what can brands learn from the arts and culture sector post-COVID. Julie leads strategic engagements at Atlantic 57, developing insights and plans that help organizations better engage their audiences. In her role, she has guided a diverse range of organizations, including AAMC, Health Affairs, WAMU, PBS, Consumer Reports, Knight Foundation, Democracy Fund, and Carnegie Corporation. Julie is also a professional musician, songwriter, and actor, with 2 albums to her credit, original songs placed on MTV, and appearances on stages across the DC area. And today I'm going to be talking to her about her April 5th article on Atlantic 57, Brands Need to Redefine What It Means to Connect. So welcome, Julie.
Thanks for having me.
So there's an assumption that connection means simply more interaction, more content, more advertising, more communication. But in this socially distant time of ours, we are learning connection isn't just a person-to-person thing. Isn't just a person to a thing, right? Can you talk about connection as it relates to the shared experience of watching a play or listening to a concert?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I've thought a lot about, both in the 2 hats that I wear. You mentioned in the intro that I am a performer and, active in the arts community, but also, study and look at how brands engage their audiences. So this was a really, really interesting thing to get to think about a couple months ago, back when the pandemic was really just, maybe we were about a month in, and I think things have even evolved since then. But I think what was interesting is, like, at the very beginning of the pandemic, there was this assumption that, the role of a brand, whether that's an arts brand or a non-arts brand, was to just put out content. And as long as we could keep putting out content, then people would, continue to engage with it. And that there was, the need for content was greater than the need for other things. And I think what we saw, certainly in the early days of the pandemic, and this is probably even intensified since then, is that it's not just the content that we put out, it's the experiences that we build around it that allow people to connect with the content, yes, but also with one another and consuming that content together. And I think in the context of an arts organization, a theater, an orchestra, opera, whatever, I think about my experiences both as an audience member and as somebody who's creating the art. And, if you think back to, like, the early Greek plays, there's this notion of catharsis, in that as an audience member, you're experiencing something together, you're feeling all the feelings together, and in the fact that you're in a group experiencing it allows you to feel things more deeply and to connect to, whatever it is that you're consuming. The connection is stronger because you're experiencing it together. So certainly as an audience member, I can think of so many times when I've been in person, at the Kennedy Center watching Bridges of Madison County, the musical. I remember a couple of years ago seeing that production there, or more recently I saw a concert version of Next to Normal that they did there. And there's something about in the quiet moments of experiencing that and hearing people, next to you, or people a few rows down, crying or laughing, and that changes the way you experience it as an audience member, and it deepens it for you. And I think about, even as a performer, there's a difference between creating art in a vacuum versus creating it and having somebody experience it with you and, applauding or laughing, or, and that feeds into your performance. And I know, I've went through some training as an actor, and they always tell you, you're not supposed to care what the audience thinks. You're supposed to be, you're doing your things for the sake of the character. But certainly as a performer, if the audience is engaging with it and they're with you, it changes how you perform, and it changes the way you experience it as well. And I think the other piece of that too, in terms of experiencing arts in a group, it's not just the product that you see on the stage. So for a theater, you put on a play, but there's so much experiential stuff around that. There are pre-show receptions, there are post-show talkbacks with the company or with the artistic staff that really help to bring the community into the performance and deepen your understanding of it. There's educational outreach in schools. There's all kinds of in-person touch points around the material that really change how you experience it. So all of that is to say there are so many ways that you experience art in person that are so hard to replicate in a virtual environment. And that was really the struggle at the beginning of the pandemic, was how do we take this thing that people experience differently in person and try to recreate that online when we can't have face-to-face interactions.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. As you note in your article, many organizations who cannot have in-person interactions have moved to streaming plays, concerts, or videos that they hoped would bridge the gap. But simply replicating content hasn't engaged their audiences like they thought it would. Part of the experience is the people, as you say. So how can organizations rethink how and what they are sharing that highlights the people of that organization?
Yeah, I think it's such a great opportunity right now in particular to almost like to tell the story behind the story. And what better way to do that than to feature the people who are making the story come to life. So whether you are a theater or I talked to an aquarium when I was doing the research for my article, and there are so many cool things happening behind the scenes now more than ever, whether that is research that's happening that doesn't ever make it out into kind of the public way that you communicate about your work, to talk to the people about why are you so passionate about this subject. Whether in a theater you have so many people that work on a production, there's the artistic staff, there's the actors, there's the playwrights, there's the directors, and being able to have each person's, give each person a voice and have them talk about why the material means something to them, or even, I've actually participated in a number of calls recently. Signature Theater here in DC and Arena Stage and some of these other big theaters have been doing like online master classes where you have a chance to do a Zoom call with, folks on the artistic staff, and they just talk about, here's what it's like. I'm a director. What does that mean? What is it like to direct a musical? And it helps you feel more connected to the people themselves. You see how passionate they are about the work that they're doing, and how they think about and approach the art that's being made. And so often we don't get a chance to see all of that. And to meet the people who are behind it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. And I think this holds true for non-arts brands as well. There's a real opportunity to tell the story and to create that human connection. I was just on a call earlier today with one of the clients that I work with at 857. We were talking about leveraging their team's voices more in social media and how there's an opportunity, because people don't really like interacting with a nameless, faceless brand. They want to interact with people. And so social media can be a great way to give, individual people a voice.
Yeah, no, that reminds me, did you see the Cowboy Museum out in Oklahoma had their security guard running their social media? It was so cute and just so pure because he didn't know how any of it worked. And I'm sure they have, new followers because of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's such a great example of giving a face to a brand and just, and also, I mean, being okay with, because I think the flip side of that is it can feel risky, right? Especially if you're turning over the reins to a public social handle to somebody else, you can't control what they're going to say. But that's okay because, the authenticity, the trade-off there is that you get the kind of unvarnished voice of somebody in the organization that hasn't gone through all the different layers of approvals and legal and all that.
Right. So a common theme of your article really seems to be know your mission and know your value. You quoted the artistic director of Roundhouse Theater as saying, make the case for why your organization is an important organization that exists in the world instead of trying to change your organization to fit what you think people might want. So in my mind, change is opportunity. So how can brands take advantage of that yet still stay within their core mission?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the change that we're seeing right now, it's not so much a change in what we fundamentally do or what we stand for. It's a change in how we deliver that to people. You mentioned this earlier, this idea of taking something that was designed for one experience or one platform and just kind of picking it up and trying to plop it onto another platform, and that's just, it doesn't feel right. And it's not as effective as it could be. And so I think a lot of what's been happening behind the scenes and on stage at arts organizations lately has been really just adapting and thinking, how can we take the spirit of what we do, whether that's a painting in an art gallery or it's a live theater work on a stage, and how do we adapt it for the platforms that we do have available right now. And Roundhouse had a couple of really interesting examples, ranging from taking they pride themselves on they had just before everything shut down had developed and built a new kind of gathering space in their building. And they thought it was really representative of the way that they want to bring people, bring the community into their space, this beautiful new lobby space. And part of that was they had a bar that had, signature drinks. And so one of the things that they did in the spirit of that when the quarantine happened was to do weekly cocktail making educational sessions as a way to take, the spirit of we're gathering place, we're, trying to encourage cocktails over conversation, and bringing that to life in a more limited way and using the platforms that were available. And I've even seen, as we're now 3 months into the pandemic, there are so many really cool examples of organizations adapting and taking aspects of like their live theater and finding ways to make it work on digital. And it's not just about recording it and putting it online, but it's really thinking, how can we create something that is more suited to this new online set of tools? For example, there have been a couple plays that have been particularly suited to the digital format because of their subject matter. There was an article in the New York Times about a play that was essentially a mother who was leaving video messages for her daughter who was living abroad. And like, what a perfect thing to do on Zoom, because it's the subject matter, the material itself is really suited for the platform. My mom, who knows I'm interested in following this, she sent me an article about a little theater in Ithaca in upstate New York, near where I grew up. And it was they had done kind of a Zoom play of kind of a weird, absurd Thornton Wilder play that is tricky enough to try to stage in person, but they did an online version of it. But they did some kind of extra experiential stuff around it. They had a pre-show chat with a local celebrity who was the mayor, and then they did a post-show talk back. So there was opportunities to connect with people and ask questions. So taking the content and enriching it with other things that are well suited to the digital platform, I think is great. And I think ultimately it's just not trying to recreate the thing in its format and putting it, in the digital platform. And just, personally, I in January co-founded a theater company, and we were right when the pandemic hit, we were in the process of casting our first show, which was supposed to take place in August. And, we've always said that we wanted to work creatively with what we had. We didn't want to, we're not the Kennedy Center, so we're not going to stage a massive production like they would. And since the pandemic hit, we've really even doubled down on that and thinking our goal is to create theater that engages the local community. And so ultimately what we're going to do is an outdoor production in the backyard of a musical in August to try to, work with what we have, and not try to create some, giant stage production in an unsuitable environment. We're going to really just try to, make it work with what we have. So
yeah, no, that's good. There's a singer that my husband and I are huge fans of, Storm Lard. She's out of Portland, Oregon, and she's been doing concerts on, someone's front porch and streaming over Instagram. Yeah, to the same.
Yeah. And there's like an intimacy in those, right? That you don't have the opportunity if it's in a big concert environment, if it's in an arena or if it's in a club or something. You don't have the opportunity. And the live streams have been great because, people can submit questions and you can really engage in real time, which usually isn't possible. So it's about, working within the platform that you do have available to you.
Yeah. The idea of transparency and acknowledging vulnerability seems like a no-brainer, at least to me, in messaging and communications, but that's not always the case, as we found in some pretty epic examples. So why is it especially important now to be transparent?
Yeah.
Okay.
And now, I mean, I think it's even more important now than it was back, 2 months ago when I wrote the article. I think we're seeing so many examples of a lack of vulnerability and how that can really impact your brand, and why it's so much better to come out and acknowledge what you don't know and what you need to know more about right now. Certainly in the pandemic, I think 3 months ago, there was a sense of like, we have to get out ahead of this and we have to show everyone that we're in command and we're confident and we have all the answers. And I don't think anybody, expected brands to have all the answers a few months ago, because we were all dealing with, uncharted territory. So, and certainly I would say in this moment that we're in now and what we've been experiencing over the past few weeks, I don't think there's a single brand that could stand up and say that they know everything and that they have an answer. So I think now more than ever, it's really important to acknowledge and to be vulnerable and to be real, and certainly be open and willing to engage and have those conversations.
Absolutely. And we faced the same thing with our organization. In March, we had an event that we had to cancel, and it would have been literally the Monday, like right after lockdown. Like it was right around the time when, and it was a struggle to say, how do you express it? We're humans too, and we know we're all going through this. So being transparent and acknowledging is very critical. From that. So last question for me, and then I'll turn it over to the group. So do you think that the most successful brands post-pandemic will be the ones who have integrated what they've implemented now into how they interact with their audiences going forward? Is it, at the end of the day, about fundamentally shifting how they engage?
Yes, I think the one silver lining in the pandemic, I think, is that it has, from all the organizations that I've talked to over the past few months, it has accelerated their adaptation or their adoption of things that they readily admitted that they should have been adapting to sooner. So digital is a huge opportunity for a couple of reasons. I think for a lot of the arts organizations, it makes their work more accessible to people who, for whatever, there's a whole range of reasons why it's not possible to get to the theater and to physically experience the arts in person. And it makes their work so much more accessible to such a much larger population. So I think that's wonderful. Anything that they can do to continue putting in place the things that they've learned can help, help make their work more accessible. I think it's opened a lot of organizations that I think used to consider themselves local. It's opened themselves up to a much larger potential audience and force them to think, I can suddenly, reach folks across the nation or across the globe with my programming. And what does that mean for my strategy? I know one of the arts organizations in DC that's very close to my heart. It's a theater education program. They have quickly made the pivot into online classes instead of physical in-person classes, and they have students signing up from across the country, whereas before their student base was limited to just folks who were located in the DC area. So there's huge opportunity there. And so for all of the organizations that I've talked with, they have acknowledged that if there is a silver lining in this, it's that these are tools and tricks and things that we should have been experimenting with all along. And this has forced us to adapt how we work and our working rhythms and the tools that we use to get to a place where we can, do this. So, whether they're crawling or they're walking or they're running right now, they're kind of various levels of adoption. But to the extent that they can continue the things that they put in place, I think they'll be all the more successful for it.
Yeah. Necessity is the mother of invention for all of us. Okay, well, those are the questions that I had. So I'm going to turn it over to our lovely additional guests and see if anyone else has questions for Julie.
Well, thanks, Anne, and thank you, Julie. I have to ask a couple of questions, and I'd love to hear more about the arts because I'm fascinated by that. And I know that personally you've had some amazing experiences these last few months as an artist, just adapting to all of this. But before we do that, it's kind of the subject of the day, that is just when we were all working our way through COVID-19. And I think achieving some great success with adapting to the new platforms. even though some brands like Hertz and others, right, seem to be taking kind of fatal hits and questionable in terms of how companies like that come out of it. But then, of course, along came the tragedy of George Floyd, the uprising around social justice and equality and racism. And so it presented kind of all of a sudden another wave, a massive wave in a lot of ways, almost a more significant and substantive wave than brands have had to deal with from the pandemic. I'm wondering if you, and I apologize, this is a little bit out of left field. I know it wasn't your topic for today, but wondered if you've been taking a look at how brands have been reacting to all of that over the last 2 to 3 weeks, and whether you see any lessons learned yet or any success stories that have come out of grappling with these issues around equality.
No, it's a wonderful, timely question for sure. The latter half of your question, if there's any success stories yet, I think there have been few and far between. I've seen a lot more missteps and kind of what not to do. And certainly I know there was an article in The Atlantic actually maybe last week calling out either the lack of responses or the kind of non-responses that that just seems like so many brands are just issuing these, checking the box, these sort of bland, non-specific statements expressing support, but actually not doing the work to say, what are we internally doing to address this issue? And what are we doing externally to address this issue, and really committing to changes? And so I think the more successful examples have been the ones that have been willing to come out and have some specificity about what they're doing. And certainly I've seen in the arts community, I've been, looking at a lot of theaters. There's actually been a couple of really wonderful articles in the New York Times talking about the role that Broadway, right, called the Great White Way of all things, like the role and how systemic an issue it is in that community, and how it starts with how racism exists in the way potential students are admitted to musical theater programs, and how that then plays out across the careers of these artists, and the limitations for some and the advantages for other. And so theaters and the theater industry as a whole have taken, a lot of rightful hits over the past couple of weeks. And so you're starting to see theaters come out with statements of their own that are being more specific about the steps they can take. But it's taken them a long time, and the longer that they are silent, or the longer they go between, having some sort of bland statement of support and actually committing to actual change, the worse it is. So I wish I had more examples of good success stories, but I feel like where we are right now, we're still in the middle of brands really grappling with what is the right way to respond. And I think so far, the only thing I've seen is just really committing to doing the work.
I appreciate that. That's great. So then pivoting back then to the arts and to entertainment, I'm kind of tagging along on Anne's question, which is, I'm curious about to what extent the lessons we have learned. So when I read your piece in April, to me, it was a big question around, well, will we survive this period, right? And what's it going to take so that we can bounce back, and so that when the world comes back to normal, we'll be able to resume our normal activities and everybody will be making money again. Yeah. Well, clearly, I think the transition period is much longer than anyone anticipated. You mentioned Broadway. If they're lucky, they hope to be back right by January. At least that's what they're telling everybody in 2021. But I've watched with fascination the arc of your own career. Many artists, musical artists particularly, that are performing now and doing it all online, right? Because that's where the audience is. So is that going to be a permanent fixture of the arts going forward? And then is there a way, do you think, to monetize that and actually make it profitable?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question, right? It's really tough, because I think you're right that the online piece is here to stay in some fashion, but I don't think it will replace the in-person experience. So if and when we're allowed to go back into theaters and concert halls, I think and I hope that people will, when they're comfortable, being in close proximity to one another for extended periods of time, being sung at, that people will, return when they feel comfortable. I think the problem with so all of this content that is readily available online, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that I am not convinced that the money will follow. With the live streams, it seems like there are some examples of artists who are able to really, either they're early adopters or they found that one really interesting creative way to monetize it. But as with, the music industry 10, 15 years ago, when there was this shift from physical CDs to everything in MP3 format and then into streaming, nobody really wanted to pay for digital music and nobody wanted to pay for streaming. And so that really has been a huge struggle for musicians to get paid for digital music. And so I think there's, because there's so many expectations that digital content is free and I don't want to have to pay for it, whether that's music or it's, video or whatever. I think figuring out how to monetize all of the online content, the theater performances, it's going to be really, really challenging, because I think there's just not an expectation that people should have to pay for it.
Yeah, I've seen so far a few musical promoters starting to take kind of a crack at it, right? They're packaging 15 or 20 acts, stringing them together in a 1 or 2 hour performance, essentially. Yep. And the ticket prices, though, are negligible, $10, $15.
Yeah.
You kind of have to wonder how many streams you have to sell in order even just to break even with something.
Exactly. And the same is true with, with Spotify and with Pandora. I always laugh every time I get a royalty statement from one of those services, and it's like one stream of a song and you get, a tiny, tiny fraction of 1 penny. So it's really about scale. So, if they were able to achieve such massive reach and visibility with one of these streams, then it starts to translate into a little bit of money. But until you hit that scale, one single stream or one, it's just barely worth anything.
Sure.
Yeah. So again, maybe it goes back to finding creative ways to package it, and I think if you can package the digital content and bundle it with other things maybe that have more value attached to them, whether that's unique merchandise, for example, getting a signed copy of something in the mail or getting something of tangible physical value, then that might be one way to encourage the interaction with the digital piece of it.
So maybe everything we've learned from COVID eventually just becomes part of 360 marketing, right? And it becomes a value add to some of the live performances and some of the recorded music.
Exactly, because I think everything that we've learned now is that there's an expectation now that you will have a digital component, and people will watch it and they want to see it. They just may not want to pay for it.
Understood. Thank you.
And I would think that could even translate into companies who have conferences or get-togethers. People may not be able to travel to this location, but they might want to log in and see a speaker or something like that. The TED format. So.
Absolutely, yeah.
Hey, Anne, I can't resist this question since, of course, you chair our great WICT chapter. And Julie, you mentioned putting together your own theater company. Could you talk for a minute about the role of women in the arts, and have you felt any barriers or challenges as a woman trying to create a career in that business, or is that all history now? What's your take on that?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think if you had asked me 15 years ago, back when I was a full-time singer-songwriter, I would have said yes. I think creatively, artistically, I always felt like I had to overcome, to walk into a club and to try to earn fans and to earn the respect of music goers. I always felt like it was harder for me as a woman piano player than it was for the guy with the acoustic guitar who could just walk in and instantly develop a fan base. So 15 years ago, yeah, I would say creatively, artistically, I at least felt personally, I'm not sure if that was the truth, but that was my perception was it was harder for me to attract and grow a fan base. I think on the more administration side, and as I guess I'm kind of part-time in both worlds, I don't think that I felt any barriers in terms of, being a woman and being able to create art. Yeah.
That's
That's an honest answer. Thank you.
Yes, and good to hear. So, any other questions for Julie? Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I am going to, when I post this video to the YouTube channel, I will post a link to the article, which is very interesting. And also, I will be posting Julie's both artistic and other Twitter and Instagram handles so that people can go out and follow her wonderful part-time career. So, thank you again, Julie, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.